Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry about that. Like I said, I went in a different route into Zoom tonight and it wouldn't let me record, so I had to log out and start over. So let me kind of change the screen here so I can see everybody. Hang on. Okay, that's better for me. Thanks. Well, tonight we're gonna, we're winding down. We've only got this week and next week left, and I've gone ahead and opened up module 6 as well as 7. There's really nothing in 7 other than your final exam. And I loaded today probably about 20 or so resources. You're not going to be tested on them. You're not held accountable for them. But as we talk about some of the things tonight, and if you had a chance to look at the PowerPoint presentation, there's some things in there that might be helpful to you, particularly if you're leading a PLC or even if you're in one. Really pretty easy to use data tools, curriculum mapping tools, and things like that that, like I said, you may find helpful or you may want to share with the rest of your team. But tonight in particular, I want to just kind of walk you guys through the step-by-step process of getting a PLC started. So if you remember back to the last time we were together, we talked about how there are essentially 5 pieces to an effective PLC. First of all, you have to have the right people. So the people on your team are important and they matter. You have to build a foundation. So there's some things you need to do prior to starting a PLC that will make it even more effective and run much more smoothly. You have to kind of know where you're going and what that path actually looks like. You have to make sure that you put those plans and ideas into operation. I used to say all the time to principals and teachers, you can have the greatest plan in the world on paper, but if you don't actually do the plan or implement it, then it's pretty worthless. And then once you do that, you're going to find that it really does run pretty effectively, but also pretty consistently. So tonight I just want to give you some tips and tools about that. Also, a review from last week too, we talked about some of the work of Stephen Covey and the fact that you need to spend your time in quadrant 2. So tonight it really is about planning and getting ready for PLCs and then getting them started. So just to review some things, remember we want to make sure that we have an effective PLC. It's been interesting as I've read some of y'all's posts in the discussion forums as well as your reflections and stuff. Some of you have been very blessed to be a part of an effective PLC, and some of you have had not the best experiences. But quite honestly, if you're in a PLC that's not effective, then it really can feel like a waste of your time and everybody else's. So the goal is to make sure that we have the most effective teams that we can and the most effective PLCs. So one of the things that you have to think about is the structure of an effective PLC. So that includes allocating time. A PLC that meets every semester is probably not going to be very effective. PLCs are time consuming and they will require you to spend time and energy not only preparing for them but in them. But if you do, I promise the rewards will be great for you after that. Also too, when you think about the structure of a PLC, it's important that you have sorry, somebody just clicked in. It threw me off. That you have your data ready and that it has been, disaggregated and those kind of things. It makes things go much better and much more smoothly. So you're not spending time calling through reams and reams of data during a meeting. You come to the table with that already done. And generally I ask people to do that, prior to it individually or maybe in small groups and then bring what they have gleaned from that data to the meeting. So you're not, again, wasting time. Also, too, remember it's all about that collective learning. So time in a PLC should be all about identifying students' needs. If you're not talking about students, then it's really not an effective PLC. Too often, and it's really easy to get sidetracked so that you're talking about the next field trip or we need to order this or we need to go through these catalogs to, spend this money today or whatever. That is not a PLC. I know as a principal, I was very, very adamant that we spend time talking just about students. So we actually had multiple PLCs, but one of them was called the Principal's Council. And that was made up of myself, my department chairs, my counselors. And we absolutely would not talk about anything except instruction, teaching, learning, and students in that meeting. We had a second meeting every week where we did the administrative kind of stuff we had to do, you know, where we made game assignments or supervision assignments and all those other things that you have to do. You can't ignore the administrative side of schooling. But we found that when we tried to do both in a meeting, guess what took over? It was all that administrative sort of stuff as opposed to what we really needed to focus on. So not only do you think about and want to make sure that you're focused on your student needs, but if you come up with a strategy or something like that that you're going to use, spend time in there practicing it. You know, get feedback from your peers. You know, this is the best way to do this particular thing. And again, it will help you tremendously. Also, to keep a focus on positive relationships, there has to be trust amongst the team members. And you know, I think I've talked a little bit with you guys about that there's two kinds of trust we need to focus on, organizational trust as well as relational trust. And we'll talk a little bit more here in a few minutes about how you really build both of those into a PLC. Also, too, it has to be based on allowing peers to observe other peers. So I know, I've been there, I've dealt with it. Teachers are really uncomfortable sometimes going into each other's classrooms. You know, they expect administrators, principals, assistant principals, et cetera, to come into the room to evaluate. But the most effective PLCs spend time going to each other's classrooms as well as other teachers across the campus. It's not to evaluate them at all. It's to look at and assess in real time what's happening with our curriculum, what's happening with our instruction, and most importantly, how it's impacting our students. So PLCs should be doing that on a regular basis. And, you know, it has to be very, like I said, there has to be trust, there has to be authenticity, and there also has to be a lot of honesty. You know, we all have off days as teachers. I certainly have them, you know, and I've had many in the past. But we have to be willing to put ourselves out there and to get honest, true feedback about our teaching. You know, if you're really brave, you can videotape teaching and then watch it in a PLC, or like I said, live walks or visits can be really powerful. Also, too, don't forget the power of that shared vision. You know, if your PLC, let's say your school, you know, your school vision is X and you're over here doing Y. Well, guess what, guys? That doesn't work. There has to be alignment between the vision of the school, hopefully the district or the parish, and also the work being done in your PLC. They should not be separate entities or be moving towards separate or different goals. And then last but not least, there has to be shared leadership. You know, DeFore talks a lot about in his book the power of teacher leadership. And I will tell you, I think it's the most important leadership, really, that you can find in any school. You know, particularly if you've worked in an urban type environment or something like that. I know when I was, you know, working in Dallas ISD, we would literally change principals. If you were an effective principal, you got moved every 2 to 3 years. So the only thing that kept schools consistently strong and consistently moving was the teachers. Oftentimes I found, you know, when I would go into a school, teachers had carried on the things that mattered and the things that were most important over time, despite the principal. So, you know, a lot of people think, oh, I don't really want to be a leader, but guys, you have to step up and be a leader. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal leadership role. You know, you don't have to be the department chair or the chairperson of the team or anything like that to be a leader. Sometimes that leadership can be just mentoring and talking and discussing and bringing everybody back to the table to talk about those things that are most important. When we think about shared leadership or teacher leadership, it has to be centered around collaboration and consensus. Believe it or not, you don't want to go and use, Robert's Rules of Order and that parliamentary procedure. There's no votes taken in an effective PLC. Everybody works to consensus. And I'll tell you, one of the things that my teams used to do that, we found really very powerful, we put 2 symbolic chairs at the front of the room. They were empty. In one of those chairs, we had a student that we named Amber. Not literally, but it was an empty chair, but that's where our fiction or, imaginary student Amber sat. Then in the other one, we had the teacher chair. And in this teacher chair was Bob. Now, we had a real Bob at our school who happened to be very difficult, very contrary. Probably for about a year, he wouldn't speak to me without his attorney present. He was just really a pain in everybody's neck. But a highly effective teacher in the classroom. He got great results, and the kids liked him, and everything seemed to work well there. But with the rest of us, mere mortals in his mind, everything was difficult. So when we worked in our PLCs, though, and we would come to a point where we were trying to make a decision, we always looked at those 2 symbolic chairs and we said, okay, is this really what's best for Amber? And if we could honestly say this is what's best for our fictional student, then we knew we were on the right track, and it kept us aligned with our vision and our mission. Then conversely, we would look at that empty chair where Bob sat and basically tried to prepare ourselves for our most difficult teacher's reaction so that we weren't blindsided. I don't know if you guys have ever had the experience where your principal or somebody from your teaching staff or whatever gets in front of the faculty and they, are like, okay, here's this great new plan and all that. And, they're basically, if people had things to throw at them, they would. We used Bob as a way to remind us how to avoid that. So if we could pitch it and sell it to Bob, we knew everybody else on the faculty was going to be fine. So we would spend time in our PLC planning for those bombs that were going to be thrown at us. And again, it just gave us a little more confidence and made life a whole lot easier. So as we think about this, I want you guys to think for just a second. Of all those things that I just mentioned, what do you think is probably the most critical? Or where do you start? What do you do first? Because that's going to make the most difference in the effectiveness long term.
The trust.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with you, Casey. Yeah, trust is absolutely essential.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts?
I would say finding the right people to be a part of the team.
Yeah. Jim Collins, is a very well-known business writer. He wrote In Search of Excellence many years ago, and he talks a lot about that not only do you have to have the right people on the bus, you have to have them in the right seats. So as and that's going to help with the trust issue like Casey talked about, but also like Contrika said, if you don't have the right people on that team, you're pretty much starting with 2 hands tied behind your back right out of the gate, and you don't want to do that. Sometimes you have no choice. So, you also have to think about, I've got this set team, I don't have a choice about who is on it. How do I build trust and build relationships? Okay.
Well, just like a sports analogy, you also need leadership in the locker room. So someone who's going to be able to, behind the scenes, away from the meeting, be able to promote things, continue things, keep things going, and not let things fall apart, between the meetings.
Yeah, Jen, that's a great point. You do need that voice outside that's going to be talking up what you want to do or what you're trying to accomplish. And to build that that's how you get to organizational trust, is you got to have ambassadors out there who are sort of your quiet cheerleaders who go around talking up what you're trying to move and accomplish, particularly if you're going into something that's a big change. I know, for example, we were on a block schedule when I was a high school principal, and for budgetary reasons, we had to move away from block to a traditional schedule. And we were big fans of the block. We really liked it. It was working for us. We were very successful with it. And so this huge, massive change, it had to happen. but it became very palatable, I guess, to everybody, because I had some great ambassadors like Jim's talking about that were leading in the locker room. They went around and talked about, here's why this is good for our kids. You know, gosh, look what we can do now and stuff like that. They sold something. So by the time we got to the actual planning stage, everybody was on board. So that is extremely powerful and will help to build that organizational trust when everybody's on the same page. Okay. Any other ideas or thoughts? Okay, well, we're going to keep moving along then. So we talked about those characteristics of an effective PLC, but I want to be really, very concrete, I guess, with you guys. So one of the things that, if you're thinking about, if you're in the luxurious position, so for today or tonight, you get to be king or queen, and you have been tasked with building the best PLC or the best team you can possibly imagine. So like I said, that doesn't happen very often. You get to pick all the players. You get to have everybody that you want. Think about, what do you do first? Meetings haven't started yet. You've just been given this great opportunity. Okay, so what do you think you have to be thinking about and doing? And there's no wrong answer.
I would probably start with determining what our focus is going to be. What kind of a PLC are we?
Okay, good, Mary. Yeah. You're going to use PLCs for different reasons. So what is it that we're focused on? Okay, excellent. Other ideas?
You have to know the people you want on the team. You have to be able to work with them, and they have to work with each other.
Absolutely, Casey. Yeah. So in your ideal world, you get to pick those people. It's sort of like I always said, I wanted to start a brand new school so I could pick everybody on my faculty. It would have been so much fun. But yeah, you've got to know what you're all about, and you've got to have the right players, and you've got to make sure that people are willing to work not only together, but also do work individually. Okay. Other ideas? Okay, you guys all look like you're deep in thought in your little pictures right now. It's pretty funny. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is, you guys have already hit on some of the critical points. Determine the team members, and then within that team, determine their roles. Everybody is an active participant.
A little bit, something about the other person, and then I would give them the agenda and tell them what we are focusing on for their particular PLC.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. Thank you. Also, too, Mary talked about kind of having an idea what it was going to be about. We've talked about having the right players, having them in the right seats. Mm-hmm. The other part of it, too, guys, is people want to know not only where you're going, but how you're going to get there. So, mm-hmm. If you establish what I call those sort of big rocks, then move into that sort of macro detail, or micro detail, I guess it would be, where you actually schedule out the meetings. I know one of the things that I did, as a principal that my teachers really appreciated and liked, they got every meeting date for the entire school year for every PLC, every faculty meeting, every conference, parent conference, you name it. We laid out the calendar for the entire school year. So that way there was no excuse. If you're part of the English PLC and they meet on Wednesdays, well, don't schedule your doctor's appointment on Wednesday, guys. Schedule it on Tuesday or Thursday or Monday or Friday or whenever. But we laid it out for the entire year so that people could plan. I mean, we do have a little bit of a life outside of school sometimes, and it really does help to give them that sense of things. And I also published to them what our big topics were. We all know that school years happen in cycles, that there's certain things that happen every year around the same time. So October for us was always Homecoming Hell Week. And I knew during that week, that's what I called it, Homecoming Hell, but it wasn't really that bad. But that entire week, we had something every single night. The kids were just crazy. The teachers were exhausted. So we purposely didn't schedule anything during Homecoming Week. We also did what we called, what do we call them? Dead weeks. So, the week before final exams, nobody got to have any activities, even my coaches. and I didn't care if it was your season or not. This was art, we needed to have that time. So thinking ahead and planning ahead as part of that pre-work for a PLC can be really helpful. So in the presentation, I talk about focusing on the pre-work, but the more stuff you can do like that and take to that first PLC meeting, the better your meeting is going to go. I've seen groups get derailed by something as simple as planning a calendar, or planning meeting times, or deciding what those sort of big things that we need to work on are going to be. If you come to the meeting with that, there's negotiation and discussion, but it's not a matter of we're going to spend 2 hours figuring out things that really are not that, they're not going to make a difference for student achievement. The other thing that I would ask you to do or think about is when you're starting a PLC, the second step is to plan out the first 2 meetings fully. Again, there's always time or the ability to change things, but if you really spend some time planning that out, it will help tremendously to move along your processes. So what are the kinds of things, based on what we've been learning and reading and talking about, that you think you would want to do in those first 2 meetings?
May
My
I
big thing.
chime in real quick? It's
Go
okay.
ahead. Who was talking?
I'll let you go, sir.
Well, my big thing is establishing norms. So the things that derail us oftentimes are the interruptions or the coming in late or trying to do other work while you're in there and not putting the full focus on there. So, I mean, at your house, you may have a basket full of cell phones whenever you eat dinner. You may need a basket full of cell phones when you have your PLC to keep everyone's attention on what's important and not on all the typical distractions that happen. And I know, kids and other things happen, but the focus needs to be where it needs to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Norm setting is absolutely essential. And I loaded into Module 7, that Documents and Resources folder. I think there's 3 or 4 different ways that you can collaboratively establish the norms for your group. Some people like to come in with their norms, and that's fine, but I also would encourage you to do them collaboratively. So if you do that, again, it's another way to build that relational trust amongst your team members, and then it's pretty easy to hold everybody accountable if they've had a say in what those norms are going to be. Okay, what else would you want to do in one of those first 2 meetings?
Miss Tracy, this is Lita Laverne.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Hi. May I chime in real quick?
Yeah, of course.
To comment earlier, and it's kind of piggybacking off of what you say right now. If I could establish anything in the first few meetings, and I may not say this correctly, but I know that we would need somebody to keep time and a secretary. I think what happens, like you say, so many times in meetings, we get off subject. And then what happens is once you really get on topic, time has passed. Mm-hmm. And then you're still in that meeting and you're trying to get out. So I would establish somebody to keep the time and somebody to take the notes. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. When we talked about, establishing roles for every team member, yes, definitely have someone who's going to keep the notes, someone who's going to keep the time. Also, too, I've seen really effective teams use someone to keep them on track, basically. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't remember exactly what they called it, but it's kind of like, okay, well, we're off a topic. Let's get back to the topic. So it's that person that just keeps you moving like they should be. So great point. Thanks, Lita.
No problem.
What else, guys, do you think that might be helpful? How are you going to build a team, guys? What kinds of things might you do to get people to know each other and be willing to work with each other?
Assessments. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know. It's so weird. I just was going to say, like in the 5 Dysfunctions book where she's talking about getting everybody's voices heard in the room, I think in a PLC, each personality type values something different, and just kind of getting all voices in your PLC heard and trying to understand what every team member values, whether it's analyzing data or talking more about planning, just kind of getting all the voices heard so that you have kind of a goal or a vision for what everybody values. So you're meeting everybody's needs and people aren't walking away from the PLC feeling frustrated, everybody's feeling satisfied.
Yeah, great point, Sharon. You want to make sure that there's more than one voice in the room, guys. You know, you don't want people just to be passive. Just like effective teaching, you know, when those silent kids are the ones you got to be the most concerned about, because you don't know where they stand. You don't know if they're being successful. It's the same thing in a PLC. You got to have every voice heard. Who else was going to chime in?
I know a problem that I have with my group that if I would, change the way we do things, it's definitely the vulnerability. One of them is very, very tight-lipped about outside of school. She does not believe in mixing business with pleasure at all. And it's like, she'll tell a story about her sister or her brother, but she doesn't tell us anything about herself. When she leaves at home, as far as I know, she goes home and pets her dog and goes to bed.
That can be a real challenge. It does make it hard to be a team when you don't feel any connectivity through the personal pieces of that. Maybe, Anne-Marie, one of the things that, I know that one of my teachers did that was leading one of the PLCs was she was like the best observant person ever. So like one of the teachers, always dressed really, really well and was very fashionable. So, she would bring up in the PLC, you always have, look so, so beautiful and, so fashionable. Where do you shop? And, just find something like that. And it really opened up this teacher. And all of a sudden she's telling us all about, she goes to France every summer. And, we're like, oh, we never had a clue. But yeah, and just try anything. I mean, literally, because you do want people to share, and some people are very private, but maybe if you can just find that in with them, it'll make a difference. Okay. What else do you want to do? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I'll go real quick.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that it's so crazy on my team right now because I have 2 pregnant teachers. So that binds them together. And what binds me and maybe, we all help each other, but what's really good is like if I need help, one is really good with technology. So I'll ask her and she'll come do technology, or I'm good with behavior and I'll help her with her behavior. So it's kind of like finding something that can contribute to each person, maybe. And then working with, building a team and being collaborative and cohesive from there. They always know, oh, if I have a child, I can send that child to Miss Laverne for a few minutes. Or even if I have a problem with a child, they might take the child for a few minutes. Or if I'm having a problem with a board and vice versa. So I think we bond a lot through that. And now we just learn to rely on each other.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Dan, I think you were trying to chime in too?
Yeah, sorry. But I do agree with her also. But what I was going to say is I thought it was kind of neat that over the summer when, we meet kind of, if you want to call it professional development, we split off into groups and kind of rotated in different like stations or whatever. And one of them was, she called it speed dating. And they had five of us on one side, 5 of us on the other side, and we had to.
Dan, you muted. Come. Dan, I think you hit mute. Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead.
I'm talking with my hands. So we had about 3 or 5 things that we had to tell, share about ourselves, and there were specific questions there, and they would time us, so we would have to, share them, and then they would ring the bell, and then we'd scoot down a chair, and then we kept scooting down until, we met with everybody. And even being there for a while, there was a lot of things that I didn't know, about other coworkers, and so that kind of, we would get tickled because some of the questions were a little silly, and it just kind of brought us together as a community. And I thought that was kind of cool. That was neat, kind of a way to get to know each other.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. And, I know as a principal, and if your principal doesn't do this, guys, maybe a conversation with them. But, we had very specific team building activities that we opened the school year with. One year we went and bowled. And, I got the distinction of being the worst bowler in the entire school. But it was a fun way for us just to get to know each other. Another time we went to well, it's piano bar, but we went during the day, so it was a piano cafe. But just the sing along, that was fun. We set up the gym one time and we did competitive games. We would do bingo, where and there were specific things, kind of silly questions that if you could answer that question, that sort of thing. But it really did. We became a very, very, very close faculty. And quite honestly, it was because I think of the team building. And then after about the third year, I turned it over to a teacher group, and I'm like, okay, y'all start planning the team building. And it just really grew from there. But a lot of people think that it's a waste of time to spend time getting to know your colleagues. But the data tells us that with teacher attrition and the loss of teachers from not only schools but from our profession, there's only one indicator that makes teachers want to stay, and that's friendships with their colleagues. Has nothing to do with anything else. So the more that we can cultivate that, the more it's going to not only help the immediate kinds of things, but it does build a stable staff. And if you're in a school that has a lot of turnover, you know how difficult that can be. So we want to have that sustainable sort of consistency with our staffs. Okay. Anything else you want to do in those first few meetings, guys? Talked about personality assessments. We've talked about team building. We've talked about making sure we have the right people, scheduling and calendaring events, giving everybody roles and assignments. Other ideas?
What about creating your vision statement or mission statement or whatever?
Yeah, absolutely. Spend time doing that. And also spend time, too, thinking about what are your goals and objectives. The way that I would do it is every 6 to 9 weeks, I would benchmark our team against our goals and objectives. When I say benchmarks, I know a lot of people think that means testing kids. That's not what I'm talking about. You have your goals and objectives that you want to accomplish by the end of the year, and every 6 to 9 weeks, just do a temperature check. How are we progressing? Are we going to make it to that goal by the end of the year? And that can be very affirming, because we do sometimes get so bogged down that it's like, oh my gosh, are we ever going to make it? And that'll really help that piece of it. Okay? Any other ideas before we move on? Okay, you guys pretty much hit them. That's perfect. Great job. The other part, though, that I want to remind us, too, is that when you start something new that's different, or even if you've been in a PLC and now you're trying to shake it up and change it a little bit, change is hard. People naturally resist change. In fact, we had a meeting today. We're kind of going through that at LSUS right now. We're dramatically changing some of our programs and stuff like that, and we've got like half the faculty that's been there a long time and they're very seasoned and they just think everything is great the way it was. And then you have the other half of the faculty that's like, it's time to blow this up and do something new and different. And it's really kind of interesting to be that anthropologist who just takes a step back and watches everybody. But we have to be very aware that, like I said, not only is change hard, there's actually a cycle to it. So as you think about doing this, I want you to be prepared for what those changes are going to cause. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of, Cotter talks a lot about change. He's one of the change gurus. And also my favorite one is actually Tomlinson. But have you guys done any change kind of theory stuff in any of your other classes? Okay, well, I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. Y'all are probably too young to even know what the Reader's Digest is. I'll give you. I'm glad somebody else knows. Thanks, Vicki. So I'm going to give you the very abbreviated version. There's actually several people out there that have studied change and have sort of made a career, quite frankly, off of it. But there is a cycle to it, and depending on who you talk to or who you ask, there's anywhere between 6 steps or 5 steps, depending, like I said, on who you talk to. And let's see if I can read this with my little tiny writing here. So in the first stages, you're going to find that people are going to go into denial. There's going to be resistance. It may be passive resistance. It may be very aggressive resistance. It just depends on their personality types. They're going to pretend that everything's fine. So again, going back to LSUS, one of the things that we have to be cognizant of all the time is, to be fiscally responsible. Every year, universities in Louisiana get less and less funding from the state, and so we have to be more able to fund ourselves. Well, a lot of people are just like, well, we need to keep our classes of only 5. Well, that's ideal when the state was giving us all the money, but they're not anymore, so that doesn't work. A lot of people just cannot wrap their head around the fact that maybe there's a problem that we need to address. So that is considered stage 1, and it is called pre-contemplation if you follow Cotter's model. Then it moves into stage 2, where people will be very ambivalent. You'll see a lot of conflicted sort of emotions. So it's kind of like, yeah, I'll go along because I have to, but they're really not bought into the change at all. And that generally, in terms of the stages, usually stage 1 will last, depending on the individual and how aggressively you sort of address things, between 1 and 3 to 4 weeks. The contemplative stage is where they're at least no longer overtly pressing you, I guess, but they're going along because they have to. They're not bought in. They're just going to kind of keep doing what they need to do because they have to. That is stage 2. Stage 3 is preparation. And that's where people are willing to accept, and they'll even do a little bit of experimentation with small changes, and they'll be collecting information about the change. And the people that are part of this are going to fall into 2 different groups. You're going to have half the group that's going to collect information about your change, and they're going to be looking for the positive pieces. So if these are looking for the positive parts of the change, what do you think the other group's looking for? They're trying to find every misstep or mistake you make, because they're going to use that as ammunition to show why the change isn't working or why it's not needed. So, I'm a big fan of pre-planning, pre-work, pre-thinking. So you've got to be prepared to counteract what they're doing to try to derail you. Okay? Then if you move on into the 4th stage, this is actually action. People between stages 3 and 4 will make a decision. They will either decide to buy into the change, or they will usually, not all, but usually will buy out of the organization. If the change is handled appropriately, where you are cognizant of each of these stages and you have been doing things to ensure that people see why we need to do this, that they're beginning to get some buy-in, they see the positive results. You got to celebrate lots of small wins along the way. Right as you hit stage 4, where you move into action, you could see a pretty big exodus from your organization. When I was a high school principal, I'll go back to that, we were undergoing massive change. It was a good school, but it wasn't a great school, and we had to do a lot of change. And we'd been at it for 2 years. Year 3, I lost 34 teachers that summer. And I was devastated because I always took it very personally when somebody left my school. But I remember very strongly what my superintendent said to me. He said, Tracy, they just weren't willing to come along and do the change that they needed to. And I had to respect that. I'd rather they leave, and I'd help them find other employment so they could be happy. And we were able to bring in a team that we really did get, on a great day, about 99% buy-in on what we were trying to do. And it paid off for us in spades, quite honestly. So in stage 4, when you go to action, that's when people are all working towards the same goal. And if you ever get to experience that, I will tell you, it's like the highlight of your life from a career perspective. I still look back on that time period when suddenly everything clicked for all of us. I would go back in a heartbeat if I could just recreate that, because it really was not only magical for us as faculty and staff, but even for our kids. And it's funny, gosh, that's been how many years ago has that been? It's been like 12 years ago that was all going on, and we've all moved on and done other things. But the community still refers to that as the golden years of the school. And even the kids, still contact me and talk about how magical that time was. So when it happens, like I said, you can literally move mountains. Stage 5 is maintenance. A lot of times we reach that goal, and if you're in a high-performing school, sometimes it's harder to stay at the top than it is to move from the bottom. So you have to pay attention to how you maintain. And then the final part of it is relapse. If you are someone who's ever lost weight or exercised tremendously and then you kind of slack off, you have a relapse and you go backwards. So we have to prevent against that. So during the stage of maintenance, you have to avoid temptation to either go back to the old way or trying to add too much too soon. So kind of my rule of thumb is that when you're going through change or you're adding things, for every one thing you add, you have to take away 2 things. So if you're going to add one new thing that you're doing, you have to take away 2 old things that you were doing and stop doing them. Because if you don't, you'll lead everybody into burnout. So think about that. And then relapse is pretty self-explanatory. Okay, so that's what's going to happen during change. But if you're aware of it, you can do things that are going to help to really, really prevent it, quite frankly. Sorry, my dog just went by. I don't know what she's doing. So I did include in the presentation some different stages of this, as well as in the documents and resources in modules 5, 6, and 7. There's a lot of things about how you can manage change. So I don't want to spend all of our time on that. Let me see if there was anything else that I just want to kind of make sure. Also, too, once you get your PLC up and running, think about how you're going to manage that from meeting 3 on. So there's basically some very specific things that need to happen. You have to be focused on data. You guys know that. You're going to hear me say that 10,000 times. Data, data, data. Spend time observing classrooms. Spend time unpacking your standards and aligning it with your curriculum. Spend time planning units and lessons. Focus on intervention for your kids who aren't getting it, but don't forget those kids who are getting it, and also, include enrichment. I know in Texas, schools are scored not only on how many students they grow at least a year, how many students meet the standard, they're also graded on how many students reach advanced level. And what we were finding was a lot of our schools were hitting the benchmarks for growth and they were hitting the benchmarks for passing the standard, but they were failing miserably at moving kids. So I would encourage you to look at your school or your class data. And if you are able to, extrapolate that sort of growth data that comes out of some of the testing, what we found, and I think it's pretty typical, was that our advanced kids would come to us at the 98th or 99th percentile, and the longer they stayed with us, the better job we did of dumbing them down to average. So we took kids that were really low, and we moved them from the bottom up to the standard, but we were also pulling our brightest kids down to the average. So enrichment's not something we talk a lot about, but that's really essential to make sure that all kids are continually moving forward and advancing. And that's part of what you should be doing in a PLC. Okay, so I've given you tons of information in the PowerPoint presentation about how to do that, as well as some tools and some resources. And I just want to close my little very long lecture tonight. I do apologize, but we're kind of making up for last week with me being gone. Classroom observations. When it's done teacher to teacher, guys, it should be extremely non-threatening. And it's really only to do one thing at a time. So for example, we knew that we were struggling with vocabulary. That was sort of a school-wide objective that we just could not seem to hit. So we started doing, we called them learning walks. It was different than a classroom observation because classroom observations are evaluative. Learning walks mean you're going to just see what's going on and figure out what the root of your problem is. So when we did our learning walk, all we were looking for was how vocabulary was being taught. And the only thing we recorded, and if you've looked in the documents folder, there's a protocol for classroom observations. So that we did what we call the 3-2-1. So 3 things that you saw that you think are just outstanding. related to how vocabulary was being taught, because that was our focus. 2 things that you are going to take back in your own classroom and use. And then 1 wondering. And a wondering had to be phrased something like, I'm wondering what would happen if, or I'm wondering how you chose this activity. So basically, it's a very nice way of saying, I see something that maybe I'm not too sure about, or I'm not really understanding why you're doing it this way. And then we literally compiled that into a letter that went out to the entire faculty. We did not put teacher names. So everything that we saw that was our 3 things that we thought were really great, we just made a running list from every observation. Then our 2 things that we were going to try to replicate in other classrooms, running list, and then the wonderings at the bottom. And what we discovered was the reason that we were failing with vocabulary on our standardized tests, as well as, just not moving our students, we weren't teaching vocabulary very well. I mean, we were doing it all wrong. So that became the basis for our professional development in our PLCs in our schools, was how do you effectively teach vocabulary so that it's not just, here's your list of vocabulary words. Monday night, I want you to go home and define them all. Tuesday night, use them in a sentence. Wednesday night, write them 3 times. And then Friday, there's a quiz. That's not how you teach vocabulary effectively. So we spent time, because of that data and that information, reteaching the faculty how to teach vocabulary correctly. Another time we did walks on student engagement. We wanted to see if our students were really actively engaged in our learning. And, kind of some aha moments. Another byproduct of it, too, is we found some teachers who I knew were superstars as a principal, because I knew what kind of data they got in their results, but they were really quiet or kind of kept to themselves or whatever. And so when other teachers would go in their room, they'd see what rock stars they were, and suddenly their status was greatly elevated. And they became the go-to sort of people. On the other hand, our somewhat less effective teachers, were pretty well known. So there's a little bit of vulnerability, but because we did it around the idea of learning and growing, it made a huge, huge difference. So classroom observations are evaluative. Learning walks are never evaluative. We never tied a specific name to anybody. It was all done generically from the group. So I really hope you guys will think about classroom walks. Okay, so what questions, comments, concerns, editorials, I don't know, celebrations do y'all have tonight? You're almost there. You only have a week left.
When you were talking about the learning walks, it just reminded me, I taught at a school one time. It was a low-performing school, but they were talking about how teachers talk to children, and they wanted this to be more positive. So our instructional strategist would come in and randomly, she would just tally how many times you said something positive and how many times you said something negative.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, guys, we want to make sometimes things so complicated, but pick those simple data points and, exactly, go in, and do a tally. We would do that too to make sure, because we found that we were concerned that not all the students were given ample opportunity to participate actively in a lesson. So we would go in and just do a tally, and what we started finding was, have y'all ever heard of the learning T in a classroom? The learning T is in a very traditional classroom where you have rows, that students who sit on the front row and down the middle row are called on at a rate of like 75% more than other students, and there's certain places in the classroom that students never get called on, even if they raise their hand or whatever. So we started charting that, and that's how we finally convinced secondary high school teachers that maybe the straight rows weren't the right idea and to reconfigure the classrooms, because we had a lot of data to show them what was happening. So yeah, simple things. That's a great idea. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Any other ideas, thoughts, questions? Y'all are just tired. You're like, just be done.
Can you talk through the SMART goals project or paper a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the SMART goals, if you're not familiar with SMART goals are a very specific protocol that people can use for goal setting. Because one of the things you want to do in a PLC is set goals for the PLC group. Some states use SMART goals as part of teacher evaluation. So you set a SMART goal at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, if you meet that goal, then you get plus points on your evaluation, or you get minus points if you don't. So all I'm wanting you guys to do, and I've given you a billion samples, it feels like, but as I want you to get accustomed to writing some SMART goals. So think about writing a SMART goal maybe for yourself, for a classroom, classroom application. But also, I would encourage you as teachers and as part of your PLC work to think about teaching your students how to set SMART goals. When we really see student achievement rise, it's when kids have very specific and they're individualized. Your goal, Alicia's goal may be very different than Katrika's, kind of thing in those classrooms. But write a goal based on just whatever it is that you want to accomplish. So that's all I'm asking you to do, is just to follow that SMART goal format and follow the rubric, or not the rubric, the template that I gave you guys. But also, like I said, ideally, you set goals in your PLC, you set goals as individual teachers, and then you take it to your classroom and the students set individual goals based on where they are. I know, again, I'll go back to when I was a principal. We were a National Blue Ribbon School of the Year, and one of the things that they pointed out was we had all of our students set goals, and we called them IEPs. I did not have 3,000 special ed kids, but everybody had their own individual education plan based on their own personal SMART goals, and we did that as part of our advisory program. And I never thought I could ever get kids fired up about academics, but, I started hearing throughout the city that my kids were going around and telling kids from other schools that we were the SMART school, kind of thing. So it really does have a powerful impact when kids set their own goals too. Okay. Did I answer your question? Okay. And if I didn't, you're welcome to say, no, I didn't, and I'll try again. Okay. Anything else, guys? Okay, y'all let me off too easy every time. We will have another meeting next week. It'll be probably pretty short because I want to give you time. Like I said, I've gone ahead and opened up the final exam, so nobody should be having panic attacks or thinking they need to study for 60 hours straight or anything. If you haven't looked, I opened it up today. It's not a secret. I'm just asking you to do a very short either PowerPoint presentation or essay or, a video or something. And there's just I think 8 or 10 questions that I'm asking you. And they're hard things like, what'd you like most about the course? What would you change? And then, things that you are actually going to take away and use. Okay. So I think I've gotten everybody, but if any of you, just an aside, if you're planning on graduating at the end of fall and you have not responded to an email that you got from me, or if you didn't get an email from me about graduation, I need to talk to you, so email me tomorrow because graduation paperwork has to be done. Okay, guys, so I'm giving you 4 minutes of your time back. Use it wisely. Don't go too crazy with that 4 minutes, but thanks. Appreciate seeing you guys and hanging in there with me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. C.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.